welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we are doing part 2 of bars. We're going to be talking about partial bars. Now, if you're still working on part 1, doing your sort of standard bars, don't feel like you need to rush, and just because this video released, it doesn't mean that you should already have your bars down. It's perfectly normal to spend 6 months, a year learning to master the basic bar. I know people who, without teachers or without guidance, have spent even more time. Hopefully that will not be the case for you. When dealing with partial bars, I think the nice thing is that you've technically already started to do them. So a partial bar is really anything less than the full covering of the strings. For example, 6 courses on a 6 course, 7 courses on a 7 course. So right now I'm doing a full bar. If I were to cover 4 courses, that's technically a partial bar, but we tend to use the term half or partial pretty freely. When we're talking about it specifically as a technique, partial bars are generally, the term partial bar is generally used when discussing a bar that is only covering inner strings. So for example, if I were to put a bar down that, or if I were to play a chord that needed an open string like this high G. Let's take this E flat chord, for example. So let's say I've got E flat on the 5th course, B flat on the 3rd course, E flat on the 2nd course, but I need that open G. Well, that's a little problematic because if I put a bar down, then I end up with the A flat. So what we have to do is we have to lift a portion of the finger to get the G. And that takes a little bit of work to learn how to do. So I've got this E flat, B flat, E flat, G. Let's throw in the G here on the 4th course as well with the 2nd finger. There we go. It's a really lovely chord. So let's talk about a few things. So most partial bars, now there are going to be some exceptions, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video and later when we discuss using alternate fingers for bars, but most partial bars are going to use the tip joint of the 1st finger. So what you'll notice is I have a very flexible tip joint. Some of you may not. You may not be able to flex that, and you'll have to get your angle from a different part of your finger or from your hand. You'll have to play around with it. I've noticed bars tend to be very individual. They tend to be very much, you have to explore your own physiology and find a way to play a chord. I'll see one person do a particular angle that works for them, and another one it's a completely different angle. So I'm going to give you some tips, but understand that you have to do experiment. Now, one thing you can do is just lay down the 1st finger maybe on the 3rd or 4th fret, covering maybe 4 strings, and practice lifting like this. And you'll notice, and I think this is important to say, is that the elbow and wrist position when we're doing partial bars, but there will be other situations as well, we'll need to deviate from what we would call our sort of standard hand position. You know, we've been working so hard as beginners and as learners to have this beautiful hand position where we're going parallel and we're keeping the wrist straight and we're keeping the elbow in a certain alignment. But when we start doing some unusual things, we're going to start breaking that. Now, we want to keep it as healthy as possible. You know, we want to avoid as much as possible bending the wrist, but some of that might be necessary to play a chord. And what we need to understand is that we're just going to do it for that moment that we're playing the chord in the piece. And then as soon as it's no longer needed, we pop back into standard position. So we're minimizing the time we spend out of that good position. This is something maybe that teachers don't always do a good job conveying. We spend a lot of time working on, well, perfect technique, perfect angle under perfect conditions. But very often when we're playing a piece of music, we need to analyze the individual moment and find what works for that best and what's healthiest, as healthy as possible for that moment. And then as soon as that moment's done, we pop back in. So for example, if I were to play this E flat chord, and you'll notice that I'm, you know, not in a terrible left hand position, but my wrist and my elbow are, you know, and I'm angled so that you can see it. But, you know, it's not ideal, but it's not horrible. So as soon as I'm done with this, and let's say I want to go to B flat chord next, I'm going to go right back to my standard position. So out and then in like this. And that, I think, a lot of people sort of get stuck in one or the other. Like if I tried to do this with my standard position, I can sort of get away with it, at least this chord if I do it, but I end up popping my shoulder forward, and I like that less than doing this. Just moving my elbow in toward my navel and getting a nice clear sound. And then right when I'm back to this, it's normal. So that transition can be something that you spend a lot of time working on after you learn to do this technique. So going back to our little exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to put that first finger down, maybe on the 3rd or 4th fret, and you're going to practice lifting it up. And this is actually kind of a good introduction to our next bar video, which will be on hinge bars. We'll go into more detail, but this is a good warm-up for things to come. So you have your bar, and then what you're going to do is you're going to lift the base of the finger, practice getting that open G. You can do this on any fret, and some are more challenging than others. And some have some pretty interesting effects with that F sharp G. Just doing this. And of course you could also practice on lower strings, trying to get the 2 open strings. So here I have my finger covering the 5th course, the 4th course, and the 3rd, and then I'm playing my 2nd course and my 1st course open. And you'll notice I'm trying not to fling the fingers out or add excess tension. And these are the kind of exercises I wouldn't do for too long, especially in the beginning, because they are injury prone if you do them incorrectly. And whenever we're learning something new, whenever you are doing a new physical thing, you are going to be doing it inefficiently, and you are probably going to be using too much energy and too much tension. So it's important that until you have mastered the technique and you're really comfortable with it, we don't spend too much time doing it, because we don't want to get hand injuries. And I will do a future video on injuries and health for the hands and for playing. So this is a good warm-up technique. And then what we do is, let's put it in context. So we've got our B flat, our E flat, and our G. And then the next challenge is to be able to get that 3rd finger down. And you'll see people will fling their fingers up, but just relaxing them. And that elbow angle and that wrist position, it's really, those are going to be things that you really have to experiment with. And again, if you try to copy me, you may not get the same results, because everybody is different. Look at that. Going back into standard position. And that's a really good thing to practice, is maybe pick a normal chord. This B flat chord is a great one. So I'm just doing B flat on the 6th course, B flat on the 3rd course, and F on the 2nd course. You can throw in the G, the D, and the other F if you want a full chord. You could do something like that if you want. Or you can just keep it simple and do this. So a 4-voice chord, moving to a 3-voice chord, which is really, this is just a perfect 5th. So you could also move it to there. You could do this. That way you have a fuller chord. Yeah. So let's say you go there. So this is B flat, D, F. 1, 3, 4. And that gives you a chance to practice your standard bar right there. So you can do. So you find that perfect shape, you get it all clean. And just as a review, I know I've talked about this before in chords, but play each of the notes individually and make sure they sound good. And then play them together. There you go. Now, there are some other great chord shapes. Sometimes a partial bar isn't necessary. I think you could technically get away with doing something like this, 1, 2, 4, but it's just so awkward that it's really nice to master this technique. There are other situations, though, where the partial bar is optional, but makes life so much easier. This G chord, which a lot of people play 1 on the D, 2 on the G, 3 on the B here, and it's quite crammed, or they do 2, 3, 4. So they either go like this or like this. One alternate option is to put 2 on the 3rd course and then put the 1st finger on the 5th and 4th course, covering 2 strings. And obviously I'm lifted. I'll try to give you a better angle there so that I can play those open strings, the top two courses, which is really nice. So, just as an overall review, a partial bar is going to be a bar that covers two or more inner strings, with the goal of being able to play open strings around it. So, like this E flat major chord, like this G chord here. Unlike a standard bar where you're covering the strings and keeping the finger flat, we have to have some sort of lift or hinge as we're going. And like I said, this is going to be a good introduction to the next video, which is on hinge bars. These all kind of flow together. And one of the other things that you're going to run into, especially in lute repertoire, is that, and this is just a little bit of a preview into some more advanced barring technique, but sometimes we need to use a finger other than the first finger. And I'll give you an example here. There's a beautiful chord I ran into, and this is a C major chord. So we've got C, we've got G, C, E. Now technically this is possible. You could play it with 3 there. So just to explain what I'm doing, I'm actually using a second finger partial bar on the 5th course and the 4th there. So I'm on C, G, C, and then I'm grabbing that high E. I think I saw this in a Francesco da Milano fantasy or something like that, or maybe it was Alberto Reed. But while it is entirely possible you could sort of set up and do this 1, 2, 3, 4, in the context of the piece that I was looking at, you just didn't have time. There wasn't time to get this down and then put the pinky bit down, and there's just a little bit of an uncomfortable stretch between 3 and 4, so it became really, really nice to just do this sort of tiny little partial bar with the second finger. And we will talk more in the 4th video on bars about, doing alternate bars. Here I'm doing a pinky bar there. You could end up doing sort of 3rd finger bars and things like that, which are very common. I see jazz players doing it, but very, very helpful in the lute repertoire. So I think take your little exercise and start thinking about lifting the base of that first finger. That maybe is your primary goal for the next couple of weeks. Test out that E flat chord, which is by far the most common one that you're going to end up using a partial bar on. That and maybe that G chord there. And that's going to really warm you up for, I think, a technique that is super, super helpful in the lute repertoire, which is hinge bars. And that will be part 3 of the barring video. This is a very difficult topic to teach to a video and not a person, because usually I have someone sitting in front of me and we're kind of playing around and testing things, and there's a lot of experimenting and there's a lot of messing around with the elbow. So I will admit that I'm walking away from this video going, gee, this is really incomplete, and I know people are going to try this out and they're going to run into all sorts of frustrations. And that's perfectly normal. And I think absolutely to be expected, because it is a complicated thing to teach one-on-one with somebody in the same room and doing that. So if you have questions or comments, please put them down. I'll do my best to help you out. What I will say is that experiment, experiment, experiment. Really, if something's not working, think about the entire arm, think about the wrist, think about the angle, think about all of those things to first just get the chord, or if you're doing the exercise, to just get a good sound. And then once you've got that, you get more and more comfortable getting into it, kind of from the air. You go, oh, okay, I can do this, this is nice. And then moving from this to maybe another shape, or throwing the G like that, this, or we do something like that, maybe we're going here, and then you go out and you find a piece, and then that opens up a whole new avenue to different possibilities. There are just so many situations. So think of this episode as a little warm up to the next one, which is on hinge bars, which I avoided for a long time, and I really regret it because now I find just so many uses. I mean, almost every single piece I'm using a hinge bar in. So I think that that is it. Other than I will say it's nice to practice on all the sets of strings. So what I would do is make sure you're also practicing this technique. I mean, I know that sounds a little weird because of the intervals, but it's a little better. Here I'm covering the 3 lower courses, and then it's open on the 3 higher courses. So just really getting used to covering 3 strings on either ones. You know, we could do 4, 3, 2. Could do 5, 4, 3, or 6, 4, 6, 5, 4. I'll do that. It's a little over here, so it's a little more pleasant. Have fun, experiment. If you're enjoying the channel, the best thing you can do to help support it is to subscribe. I'll also put my link to my Patreon in there if you'd like to support in the description. If you'd like to support in that way, it's always very, very helpful. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Happy looting, happy practicing, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.